Okay, let's get started while people dial in. First of all, thanks guys for taking time on a Saturday afternoon to hear about Gen AI. Thanks for that in the first place. So this session, as I was putting in the description, so it's a very fundamental session. So you can think of it as a generative AI 101. So some of you in the call may already have some background, have some experience working with Gen AI, but I designed this short presentation with beginners in mind, right? So there might be simple concepts. So the design of the course is to cater to every kind of audience. Yeah. So that is how I structure this presentation. Yeah. So my name is Ashwin. I'm a technologist living in Singapore. So I'm a regular blogger. I run my own blog. At work, I love solving business problems for organization, and I'm a keen follower and learner of technology. So I do run a newsletter for tech leaders called techleadcompass.in. I'm also quite active on social media in LinkedIn. Yeah. Okay. So this is the meme that I came across a few days back. So is it because generative AI is a term that is being talked a lot about these days? So don't worry that if you haven't heard about Gen AI or you have read about it only in the news. So we've all been there, right? So Gen AI is a very Gen AI is in very early stages. We've all been there a few months back or even a year back. And the purpose of this session is to lend you a helping hand so that it gives you a starting point to explore further into this interesting field. So if you have noticed in the news earlier this week, OpenAI launched the new version of GPT. Again, we will come to what GPT is soon, but the GPT 4.0, based on the demos that OpenAI has launched, it seems to be a groundbreaking revolution, right? So I've included one of the video in the presentation today, but you should go back and check the few demo videos in OpenAI. It is truly mind-boggling, right? The capabilities, yeah. So it is very essential that all of us has at least a basic understanding of how these models work and how the generative AI has a capability to transform the world. So what is generative AI, right? In very, very simple terms. So no technical terms or no jargons. So generative AI or Gen AI, which is commonly referred to as, it is a software that can generate content, right? Based on prompts. At a very simple term, this is what generative AI is, right? So before generative AI came into picture, AI and ML has been there for decades, right? So if you go back and look at the literature, AI, machine learning, deep learning, neural networks, these concepts have been there for multiple years, right? So the major difference, the major differentiating factor between the traditional AI and Gen AI is its ability to generate content, right? So that is why it is called generative AI. And here it started with content, which is mostly textual. But if you look at the recent advancements in the models, so they are able to generate images, videos, code, and various type of things, right? It's evolved over a period of time, and that period of time is very short as well. So a quick recap on the world of AI, right? So the artificial intelligence, as you all might have heard or read, so basically, it is mimicking what the humans does, right? So it looks at the humans. There is certain level of programming to mimic how the humans perform, and the machine tries to predict or repeat it the same way. So that is the broader spectrum under which all the other aspects come in, right? So one branch or one subdomain of artificial intelligence is machine learning, right? So in machine learning, instead of completely teaching a system as to what to do, the system can learn from data, right? So this is what you would have heard as training your machine learning models with data. So this is by a technique by which the computer learns from historical data, training data, and so on. And this is slightly different from AI because in this case, the machine can make its own inferences and create its own behaviors based on the data that it learns from. And then the deep learning is another subset of the machine learning, which is mimicking how our brain works, right? So our brain is a new network of neurons. Neurons is nothing but it is storing information, storing habits, storing behaviors. And then the power of neurons comes by the way they are working with each other. So deep learning is like mimicking the human brain, where you not only learn from the training data that you are provided, but also be able to generate intelligence out of it, right? So if you see the spectrum of AI, ML, and deep learning, generative AI sits in the deep learning space, right? So that's where the generative AI sits in. Yeah. So a quick recap on how we learn and act, right? So we start as kids, right? So where we start learning by looking at our environment, gathering data, reading books. Yeah. So we start by gathering data from our environment. We read books. We gain knowledge by looking at the environment and getting the data. And then what we do as we grow on, as the brain grows and the neurons develop, so we identify patterns, create cognitive connections from the information that you learned, and then that is used to speak, take action using the inputs. Okay, so in a very, very simple term, I think in reality, the human brain is much more complicated than this. But in simple terms, you get the data, you identify patterns, create the cognitive connections, and use these connections to speak or take actions, right? So this is how, as humans, we learn and act. So Gen AI systems work in a very similar way. So at the middle, what you see is typically called as a generative AI system or generative AI model. So how it all starts is it starts with pre-training, right? So what is pre-training? So pre-training is nothing but taking large corpus of data, right? So think of it like taking all the data from Wikipedia or encyclopedia or everything around the world, taking these large volumes of data and use unsupervised learning. So why unsupervised is important here? Because so typically machine learning has two aspects. So one is supervised learning, where you label the data, you talk about the data to the machine and help it learn, right? Unsupervised learning is where machine identifies or understands the data, understands the patterns, and able to train itself. The unsupervised learning gives the power that the Gen AI has, right? Because it doesn't really need a particular set of humans to sit and teach it, right? So it takes the large volumes of data, and this process is called pre-training, right? So this is a very expensive and time-consuming process, and this is what the race is on, right? So if you look at big companies like Google, AWS, OpenAI, and even recently Snowflake, Databricks. So what everybody does, they take this large corpus of data, they build models, they train the data with these large volumes, and then build a model that is able to give you responses, right? So once this pre-training is done, how you interact with the Gen AI system or model is you ask for something as a prompt, right? So what is a prompt here? Prompt is nothing but a natural language, the same way that you interact with each other. So you interact with the machine, right? So you ask for something as a prompt. So there is a conversion going behind the scenes, right? So whenever there is a natural language prompt coming, the machine converts it into a binary format we call as embeddings, and then uses that to look for information that it has trained on, and then gives you a response back. Okay. So in the response, there is a very important distinction that we need to understand is a Gen AI system does nothing but iteratively predicts the next best word, right? So this is what a Gen AI system does, right? It doesn't give you reasoning or an answer using its knowledge, right? So it doesn't have a brain. All it has done is it has taken large volumes of data and trained itself, and it is able to predict what is the next best word. Okay, so this is a very important distinction because this is what is differentiating the Gen AI systems from the humans as of today. Yeah. So there are three key terms that all of us need to understand whenever we are talking about Gen AI. So if you are looking at Gen AI news, so you will come across these three terms, right? So and these are very fundamental to generative AI. The first one is training parameters, right? So the training parameters, as the name says, is nothing but what is the volume of data that a particular Gen AI model is trained with, right? So higher the number of training parameters, then it means the Gen AI model is trained with a large amounts of data, okay? Typically, if you look at a model like Llama 3 or even the GPT, so they're trained with billions of training parameters, right? So typically, the training parameters range from 7 billion to somewhere around 70 to 80 billion, and then it keeps growing day by day. So more the training parameters, higher the number, you can understand that the model is trained with a huge number of data. The other caveat is higher the training parameters, the bigger is the model, so that if you have to run the model and use it in your own infrastructure, you will need to be able to have more expensive machines called GPUs, which will come to it in the next slide, right? So this is training parameters. The second concept is called tokens, right? So the tokens are nothing but they are the inputs that the model can get, right? So typically think of tokens as words or even characters, right, that we speak and that comes in the natural language. And higher the number of tokens that the model can handle at the same point in time or given session, then more complex prompts can be handled. Okay. So for example, earlier this week, Google launched Gemini 1.5 Pro. So they made a upgrade of it. So in the current form, it can handle about 1 million tokens, right, in a given context window. So that is the next concept is context window. A context window is nothing but, so let's say you and me are having a conversation, right? The context window is nothing but we are talking about a specific topic. So let's say we start talking about IPL, right? So we are talking about, okay, so what is the where does each team stand? What do you think will be the playoffs? Who will be playing in the playoffs? And then this is a conversation, right? So this is called a context window because we started talking about IPL with a particular goal of discussing where every team stands in the IPL's context, right? This is what we call as a context window. So even for machines, for the Gen AI models, so the ability to recall information during a session is called a context window. So that, let's say you start asking a question to the GPT model. So it gives you a response and then you ask a follow-up question, right? So the bigger the context window, so the Gen AI model is able to get into longer conversations with you, right? So in summary, these three key terms you need to keep in mind whenever you are looking at Gen AI models or even evaluating models. Training parameters, how much data it is trained on, tokens, how many input parameters it can handle at a given point in time, and then the context window, how long the machine is able to get into a conversation with you. Okay. So moving on, very quick introduction on what is a GPU, right? So if you have assembled computers 10, 20 years back, you know that we had these GPUs, which is nothing but graphical processing units. So traditionally, these were used for improving the graphics performance of your computer system, right? So they were used primarily in gaming systems. So if you want to have a higher gaming performance, so you'll have much higher or much better GPUs. That was a traditional usage. But the industry has pivoted, let's say in the last 5 to 10 years, where the parallel processing power that these GPUs bring in. So the industries or the companies saw that, okay, this is a potential to build much complex or much sophisticated AI systems. So these days, the GPUs is like the gold for AI space, right? So for example, NVIDIA is one company which is leading the race in the market. There are also other companies creating GPUs. So now the GPU is nothing but the machines or the fundamental building blocks on which the AI systems run. Okay, so that is something that you need to know as graphical processing units. So this is a very good pivot from gaming space into the AI space that we have it today. So the next thing that I will share about is there are two ways of using generative AI models, right? So there is always a misconception that, okay, so if I have to use Gen AI, then I need a bigger machine. So I need to have heavy infrastructure where I need to host my Gen AI systems. So it is not always true, right? Because in the industry today, there are two ways of using generative AI, right? So the first one, I call it as a Gen AI as a service. So as the name indicates, so this is similar to a platform as a service or software as a service where the cloud providers host the Gen AI systems, right? So they host it and then they expose APIs for you. A good example of this is Azure OpenAI, but there are similar APIs for Google's Gemini as well, right? So here the main advantage here is the hosting and the maintenance is handled by the cloud provider. So you don't have to provision a machine like a GPU and you pay per use, right? So they charge you based on the number of calls you make, the number of tokens. If you remember, we talked about tokens is the number of words and characters that you pass, and then the number of inputs and the outputs that you get from the model. So this is the pay-per-use model where Gen AI is as a service. But the other drawback here is that data in most cases will be sent over to the cloud and then the processing happens on the cloud and the returns and the data response comes back to you, right? So which means if you are working with confidential data, proprietary data, this may not always be a best option for you, right? The second way of doing it is private Gen AI hosting. So here what you do, you take the Gen AI models that is available either as an open source or closed source. So you host it on powerful machines in your data center or even in your cloud infrastructure. and then you use the GenAI capabilities of the models, right? So here, as you can compare with the previous one, you have full control of data because it is data doesn't leave your perimeter. But the drawback of this approach is you need to really have heavy infrastructure, heavy machines, and it will cost you quite a lot. Okay, so depending on your organization's needs and what you're trying to do, so these two models can be interchangeably used. But if you want to start as a developer, you want to play around with GenAI, so the first option is always better, right? So use GenAI as a service, and then probably there are GenAI models which are lightweight that can be hosted on your laptops as well. So there are two types of GenAI models at a very broader level, right? So one is the generative language models. So this is where you give in some text, and sometimes you can also give inputs in multimodal forms like images, videos, and so on. And it gives you the response as a text, right? So this is, for example, it could give you a response in a chatbot. It could generate code for you. It could generate a document for you. But all the response comes in the natural language, right? So this is the generative language models. There is the other type of model, which is the generative image or video models. Okay, the video models is just picking up. For example, Google launched VO and OpenAI launched Sora. But there are a lot of image generation models like DALI, Stable Diffusion, which produces images, right? So in this case, you give a prompt or you give a related image, and instead of generating a text, they generate images or videos for you, right? This is a very broad category of two types of generative models that are in the industry today. So before going into details, I want to take a pause and see if anyone has any questions before we proceed further. Cool. Okay, so let me proceed. We will always have some time later for Q&A. So now we talked about GenAI models. Okay, so where does it sit? How does it work? What are the types of GenAI models? But then we will go to the next level, right? So we will try to understand a few finer concepts between in the context of the GenAI models. The first one you need to know is foundation model, right? So a foundation model is nothing but a model that has been pre-trained. If you remember a few slides back, I talked about pre-training a model with a large corpus of data that is available in the internet, right? A foundation model is nothing but somebody started doing this, they pre-trained it for you, and then they give you a model that you can use out of the box, right? So this is typically all the models that you have on the market today, right? The GPT-4, Llama 3, Mistral, all these models that is available today, either as an open source, which you can download and use, or some models are licensed where you have to purchase a license to use. So, but the heavy lifting of training the model with the general data or the large volumes of data is already taken care by another organization. Okay, in most of the cases, the other organization is a very huge organization who has lot of infra power, lot of money that they have used to train the model, and this is what we call as a foundation model, right? And then this foundation model will be used to generate the new content, right? It could be text, image, code, as we discussed before. The foundation model is a starting point of GenAI, right? But think about it, right? So because when you get the data or when you get a foundation model, it may not always solve the business needs that you may have. For example, you may be working in a e-commerce company or even in a banking industry and so on, right? So there will be some specific content or specific use cases, or there may be organization specific data that as foundation model may not be trained with, right? So the foundation model is a good starting point, but it doesn't always solve the needs of an enterprise or even a smaller company that is going to use the foundation model. Okay, that is where, so the foundation models are really great, right? Because it's trained on a huge corpus of data. They're robust and versatile for general purpose usages, but they fall short when you need to be when you want them to be used for specific needs. Okay, that is where the concept of customization or custom models come into picture, right? So custom model is nothing but you take a foundation model, you customize the content generation, right? So the in addition, in top of what the foundation model is trained to work on, trying to produce, so you customize it to the generate content that is very contextual to you, and then you get a custom model. Okay, so on this custom model will generate not only the general content or generic content for you, but it could also generate new content. So for example, let's say you're an e-commerce company, right? So you could train the custom model, you could train the foundation model to answer certain questions about your products, right? So you could train it on your product catalog, you could train it on your return methods, you could train it on your inventory data and so on. So then it could act as a chatbot or a service bot for you, right? So then it knows what products you're selling, and whenever a customer is coming and asking about a product, it will be able to answer the questions to a customer. This is one example where a custom model is useful, right? So and then many industries, so banking, e-commerce, give and take any industry, a custom model is where the true potential of a generative AI model is utilized, right? And then how do you customize? Okay, so there are three common ways or three popular ways in which you do customization of foundation model. Again, each of this has multiple variants and multiple nitty-gritties. But as this is an introductory session, I'm going to leave it only at these top three levels, right? So first, let's start with prompt engineering. Okay, so these are the three ways in which a model can be tuned. A prompt engineering, in very simple terms, right? So you take a foundation model, so you don't modify any internals of the model, right? So the model is kept as is, as a black box, right? So that you take the model, but you train it by talking to it, right? So for example, you tell the model like, so if this is the question that is being asked, so this is the right answer, right? So basically what you do is similar to how you train a dog, for example. So you give certain instructions, so you give certain inputs, and you train the model to give a what is the output that you're expecting, right? And there is a whole field to do this because it is more complex than we can imagine. So there is a whole field, and that is called prompt engineering, right? So the prompt engineering is where you're training a model through multiple prompting. So it could be like you zero prompting means you don't prompt at all. You just take the foundation model as it is. A few short prompting is where you're training the model, giving few instructions and few responses that you're expecting, right? As you can imagine, this is very faster to implement. It is very efficient for simple use cases like you want to have a Q&A system, or you want to have a customer service bot. So you want to have some specific skills. So this is very useful for such scenarios, right? But in other complex scenarios, this is not very sufficient for you. So that's when you get into fine tuning. Fine tuning is so you don't treat the foundation model as a black box. Now, what you do, it is more a white box approach, right? So, what you do, you go inside the model, you look at the model, and then earlier we talked about parameters, right? So, parameters are nothing but how the model is trained, right? So, what you do, you open up the model, you tune or adjust the parameters so that it's able to give the response that you're expecting. Okay, think of it like, let's say, opening a car and then replacing the engine or making some modification in the engine so that you are customizing the car for your specific needs. So in this approach, this cannot always be done with all the models, because if you remember earlier we talked about open source model and closed source model. This particular approach can be only done with the open source model, because the closed source model like GPT-4 will not allow you to modify the parameters using which the model has been trained, right? So the fine tuning is typically used where you get access to the internal workings of a foundation model, right? And then the last approach, which is a good mix of these two approaches, is called RAG, right? So RAG stands for Retrieval Augmented Generation. I have a few slides later to explain further about RAG. So, but what it does is, so you take a foundation model and then you augment it, right? So what do you mean by augment is you provide additional information using knowledge sources, right? So for example, you could provide it with a document, it could provide it, you could provide it with the database that you have in your organization, so that the model is able to enhance its knowledge, not only the general knowledge that is got from the foundation model, but it is able to expand its knowledge using the custom resources that you're having, right? This is a good hybrid approach that stands in between the prompt engineering and the fine tuning. Okay, there are three ways in which you can customize a model. The next few slides, I will talk a little bit about each of these techniques, right? So the prompt engineering. So this is a process of iterating a generative AI prompt. So it's one shot, two shot, or multi-shot, and then improve its accuracy and effectiveness, right? So typically how it works is, so this is a typical life cycle of a prompt development, right? So initially you start with test cases. So test cases are nothing but the prompts that you want to give to a generative AI or a foundation model. Then you look at the responses, then you engineer the preliminary prompt. When I say engineer, what I mean is, okay, can you be a little bit more clear, or can you use different words, or can you use some keywords, right? So to train or improve the prompt response, right? And then you do this in an iterative way. So you test it against the test cases, you refine the prompt and so on, and until all the test cases are passing for you, right? And then the output that you get is a shared polished prompt. Okay, so this is what is in a nutshell, what a prompt engineering is all about. But you can imagine, right? So if you have to train it on huge sets of data and huge sets of information, So this itself will become a discipline, right? So how you can properly train your Gen AI models to your particular use cases, right? So there are some of the best practices. I won't go into each of this. I will share the slide deck with you later. So few tactics to get the most benefit out of prompt engineering is, okay, so include details for more relevant answers. So instead of, because as humans, right? So even if I tell you or ask you a very simple question or give you a simple answer, you will be able to interpret it, right? So you will be able to understand what I am asking because we are more contextual beings, right? But a machine needs to be explicitly asked for certain things. Okay, so one key tactic for good prompt engineering is, okay, be very specific, be very explicit when you're asking details. You sometimes it works if you ask the model to adapt a persona. For example, you can tell, okay, imagine yourself as a customer service agent, right? Then the model will assume that persona, right? So that then it will already know about what the customer service agent will do and ask, right? So this is another tactic that you can use. Use delimiters, specify the steps, give examples. These are some of the ways in which you can use the prompt engineering to get the maximum benefit from your Gen AI models, right? So now prompt engineering, as if you remember, this is a white box way, right? So you don't go to the internals of the model. You get what you want out of the model by talking to it, right? So now fine tuning. So fine tuning is the process of tweaking the inner workings of the Gen AI model. So the inner workings is nothing but the parameters, right? So the parameters are something called as weights. Okay, so weights tell you, okay, so how important a parameter is and how the parameter should be used with each other, right? So fine tuning, there are several ways of fine tuning. So one common way is, so you go look at the weights and then you adjust either some of the weights or you adjust all the weights, right? So there are techniques like LoRa, CLORA. There are some techniques which you use to customize or fine tune the models, right? So, but as I told you earlier, so you will only be able to fine tune if the model is open source and it opens the doors for you to go in. If it's a closed source model, the fine tuning is very, very restricted, okay, as to what you can do with the model, right? So I won't go into much of a detail. So I have a separate presentation. I will share the deck with you on the different details of the fine tuning. If you're interested, you can go through that. The third one, if you remember, I talked about is retrieval augmented generation. And this is a very, very hot topic now. So the retrieval augmented generation, if you remember, as I told you before, so it takes the foundation model. You are providing some external sources in your organization like documents, FAQ, Confluence pages, for example, and then it learns the information that is very contextual to your enterprise or context or organization, right? So this is what is retrieval augmented generation is. So how RAG works, right? So let's start this diagram, read it from left to right, right? So you start with a question. Okay, so you ask a question to a bot, like a chat bot with a UI. So you go and ask a question. So initially what it does is, so your question may be a very, very simple question, right? So let's say you have an employee bot in your organization. Okay, so first one question that you might go and ask the bot is, okay, how many leaves, how many paid leaves I have in my balance, right? So how many paid leaves I can take for the rest of the year? This is a question that you're asking the bot, right? So typically a chat GPT system may not be able to give you an answer because a chat GPT doesn't know your organization policy, doesn't know how many vacations you have taken before and so on. It cannot give you an answer. But a RAG-based system that you have in your organization, what it will do, once you ask the question, it knows that, okay, it has to go to a particular database. The database could be a HR database, right? It will go to the data source. It will look up for the relevant information like, okay, so how many paid leaves you're entitled for the year, how many leaves you have taken, and how many leaves you have balance that can be taken for the rest of the year. So that is the smart retriever step, right? So that is what you see in the second step. So once it is able to retrieve, so then the third step is it will take the question that I asked. It will also add the relevant information that I provided to it. And then it goes to your LLM, right? This is your Gen AI model. So now the Gen AI model is not only having the question, it is also having all the relevant information to answer the question, right? So then what it does what it is good at, right? So it takes the natural language question and documents, it generates the output. Okay, so Ashwin, so you have 5 days of paid leave balance because it is able to get it from the documents that it retrieved from the HR system. And then this response will be given back to you, right? The fundamental difference, if you remember, from a generic LLM and a RAG system is generic LLM will take the natural language query, use it to convert based on the generic knowledge that it has learned and give you a response. But in a RAG system, it takes a natural language query, but it augments it, right? So that is the augmentation piece in RAG, right? So retrieval augmented generation. So it retrieves the relevant information and able to generate content which is answering or which is appropriate to the question that you have asked. So the last thing that I wanted to touch upon is AI agents, right? So AI agents is something that is gaining a lot of traction, right? So we started with LLMs, we went to RAG, and then now AI agents is the talk of the town, okay? So AI agents is nothing but it goes one step further, right? So far how we have been using LLM system is, so give it a prompt, you get a response, or give it a series of prompts, get a much better response and so on. AI agents is nothing but goal based, right? So what I mean by goal based is, so you give what you want the AI agents to achieve, right? So for example, in a particular organization, right? So let me take again the example of the employee system, like a HR system, right? You could have an AI agent which is helping with employee onboarding. Okay, so you could have an employee onboarding AI agent. Okay, so what it does, it is able to understand the different systems in your organization, right? So your organization might have, let's say, the employee database system, your leave management system, your payment system, payroll processing system. It could have multiple systems, right? So what an employee onboarding AI agent does is, so it is able to understand the instruction that is given to it because there is a new employee. Your job is to onboard this employee into the organization. Then what it does, it goes behind the scenes, triggers a workflow that is able to work across all the systems that is relevant to an onboarding of an employee, and then completes the task and then gives me the response, right? So it may not be an immediate response. It might take also a period of time, but you get the gist of it, right? So the AI agents don't work for like a prompt and a response, right? So they work based on taking the goals, then breaking that into tasks, and then implements the task for you. Okay, so that's why AI agents is going one step further towards a general artificial intelligence, right? So where this is technically what a human will do, right? So let's say if you have a HR assistant in the organization, this is exactly what a HR assistant will do, right? The person will do multiple steps to onboard an employee. But now you are bringing that intelligence into a machine, and that part of the machine is called AI agents, right? So typically, how does it work? AI agents work in a particular environment, right? So in the again relating it to the example that I gave, the AI agent is working in a organizational environment, right? So it looks for different inputs. In this particular case, the inputs can either be automatic inputs or the inputs can be the manual inputs, where the HR manager says, okay, I want to onboard XYZ employee with these details onto the system. So once it gets the inputs, then the next step that you can see here is the perception, right? So it takes the inputs, it perceives the inputs, right? So it tries to break down the inputs into different tasks that needs to be implemented to achieve the goal. Once it is able to break it down to tasks, so then it goes into something called as a brain system, right? Again, the brain system is nothing but your LLM. Okay, so the LLM, there could be multiple LLMs here, and there could be multiple RAGs, in my opinion, right? So because it goes into multiple knowledge bases and data sources and so on. So once you break down into tasks, then the AI agents decide how to implement those tasks. Okay, for that it takes the help of LLM agents or LLM systems. So once it is able to do that, then it takes the actions, right? So it implements. So once it knows what I have to do, how I have to do, then it implements each of the actions and then get the response. So once it is able to get all the responses together, it is consolidating and then responding it back to the person who triggered the action. So as you can see, the LLMs and RAG systems are getting much closer to the human ways of working through AI agents. Okay. So yeah, so moving on. So to summarize here, right? So what we saw with the LLMs was the starting. So the Chat GPT was launched in 2022. That was the year of LLMs because it was released in the public domain. Then 2023 was the year of RAGs. So as you can explain now, RAG is nothing but you're taking foundation model, enhancing it to the knowledge or the information that is relevant to your context. And 2024 will be is the year of AI agents, where you're taking the power of LLMs and RAGs and be able to make the machines work towards specific goals. Yeah. So what are the different Gen AI use cases, right? So chatbots, Q&A is a very common use case, image content generation, Text summarization is something that I use a lot. I'm pretty sure you are using a lot as well. So this is to condense the text, make it more tight. Coding assistance is something that is evolving a lot because if you have been seeing some demos from the big companies, so there are coding assistants which can generate a complete application for you, right? So there is also talk of, okay, so what will be the developers be doing in 5 years from now? Not even 5 years, right? So let's even 2 years. So this is one chain of thought and one line of thought that is having that people are having. There are insights generation, right? So I've also seen use cases so where there is large amount of information in the organization or even in reports. So you want to condense the information, right? I want to gain insights from the reports that is being generated. So Gen AI is one good use case of Gen AI is where you can generate insights from large volumes of data. There could be document bots. Document bots is nothing but so one of the use cases that we are working is so there were like thousands of PDF documents, right? And then these PDF documents have to be referred continuously by a large group of people, right? So now it is not technically possible because you have to go and search across documents, try to find information, try to remember something, and so on. So what you do, you use the power of RAG. We talked about RAG earlier, right? So what you do, go to the RAG, give all the 1,000 documents to it, make it like a knowledge bot that you can interact with, which can answer questions or answer information that is from the documents that you have, right? So this is one use case where it can use as document bots. There is another interesting use case so where if you want to interact with, let's say, your data lakes, right? So data lake is nothing but a central data store in your organization which hosts large volumes of data, right? So there might be queries that you're running on the data lakes or even data warehouses. So one evolving use cases, so you give a natural language interface, right? So instead of writing SQL queries by yourself, you can give a natural language query, and then the machine behind the scenes will be converting it into SQL queries, right? And then gets the data from the databases and returns the response back to you. So this is another use case that I see it evolving. Yeah. So maybe anyone in the call would like to share what are the popular use cases that you have seen in your organization or context that you don't see here?
This largely covers most of them.
Yeah, yeah. Got it. Yeah. I think there are multiple variants also, right? So for example, in the document bots, it could be different types of documents, for example. There could be some sub variants, but yeah, these are the much broader categories. But as you can see with the image generation, video generation going mainstream these days, so I think the use case will only be evolving, right? Because I also came across I think an article or a use case, so where it can generate a complete PowerPoint deck, right? So you give it an intent as to what you want to present, and then you give information and the data that you used to prepare with, and it can come back to you with a nicely done PPT, okay, or a slide deck that you can tweak it and use it for your presentations, right? That also I've seen it as one of the evolving use case. But yeah, I didn't make this deck with Gen AI for sure, but probably there'll be a day when most of us will start using functionalities like this. Okay, so here's a quick list of the popular Gen AI models. So GPT-4o is the latest version of GPT family of models from OpenAI. So it is a closed model. So it is now multimodal. So it can take multimodal is nothing but ability to take inputs in different formats and either giving output as text only or multiple formats also, right? This is what we call as multimodal system. GPT-4o from OpenAI is the recent launch. Llama 3 was launched, I think, 1 or 2 months back by Meta, and Llama 3 is one of the very strong open source model. And there are multiple variations or multiple forks of Llama 3 as well that is in the available in the open source domain, right? So, and then it can take inputs and text, generate text or code outputs. Gemini 1.5 Pro is the latest one from Google. It is a closed source model. Cloud A3 is from Anthropic. Again, it is a closed model. It has standard text features. It also hosts AI vision as a capability. Mistral AI comes in two variants. It comes in open and a closed variant as well. And then it also comes in different flavors, right? So depending upon, I think they have 3 classes of Mistral AI models. So which will help you, which is trained on different set of parameters and can help you with multiple types of use cases, right? And then last one is an example of a stable, the image generation model. DALI is again from OpenAI. Stable diffusion is also another image generation model. So as you can see, these are some of the popular Gen AI models. But again, this is by no means exhaustive. I just wanted to bring this in front of you so that when somebody talks to you next time about one of these names, so you know where does it fit and what does it do, right? So, but this list is very, very rapidly evolving, I would say. And there are also regional models coming into picture, right? So I know there are models that are, for example, for the Indian market. So there are models that are coming up which can interact in the regional languages, right? So because all these models specifically work with English as a natural language, but there are models coming with the regional language support as well. So this will only keep growing, in my opinion, right? As and when the LLM adoption happens across countries, across industries, across regions, and as it becomes more democratized, so this will only continue. Yeah. So can Gen AI systems reason, right? So this is more like a philosophical topic, right? So can Gen AI systems reason? If you remember what I told you a few slides back, Gen AI system is nothing but it will predict the next best word, right? So based on the input that you give, it predicts the next best word or predicts what is the output, right? So this is a very nice article. I think you should take a look at it. But in the current form, so there is a consensus among the a lot of people that Gen AI systems cannot reason, right? So it cannot reason like you and me. Okay, so what I mean by reasoning is, so you will be able to use the different chain of thought. You could bring in the philosophical aspect of it. You could think about the emotional aspect of it, right? So the large language model doesn't have it at this today, right? So all that it does, it is trained on huge, huge, huge volumes of data, and it has a very nice way to 99.99% predict what is the next best content that needs to be generated and gives it back to you, right? So there is, in my opinion, there is quite a long way before such models can mimic humans. But as of today, they are really good at doing a lot of things that we are doing. No, no question about that. But they still lack the reasoning capability as of today. So there are a lot of good things, right? But what are some of the things that we need to watch out for, right? So there are a lot of potential ethical issues that can come out of Gen AI, right? So few of them is it can generate harmful content. For example, there could be copyright or legal issues. So in the industry now, so there are, for example, if you have been watching the news, so a lot of these paid publishers like newspaper subscriptions that they charge their customers, so now if the Gen AI system is going to train on some of the data, so they lose their edge, right? So there are some copyright issues that are evolving in the market. There is also bias, right? So if you remember, there was an incident on the Google models a few months back, where it was all the information that it was giving was specific, for example, to a particular race or a color, right? So it was discriminating the race and religion color. So which is a Gen AI model can do a lot because it depends on the data that it is trained on, right? And then it could also have data privacy violations. It could lack transparency, for example. These are some of the ethical issues that can arise from the Gen AI. So what are some of the best practices, right? So that you can make it more responsible, right? To overcome some of the ethical issues. You could train it with first party data a lot because this is the data that you control. So train a lot with the first party data. So bring in human in the loop, right? So not only training and testing with the machines, but also bring human in the loop, where you validate some of the content that is generated, some of the responses to make it better, right? Testing is one of the strategies to build more responsible AI system, and also getting continuous feedback back into the system, right? Because machine learning models get better with data. And then once you have feedback from the ground, when you feedback the data into the AI system, so that is when the system becomes much better, right? So this is one video that I thought you guys should watch. I don't know if most of you have watched. Maybe since we have some time, I will quickly play it. It is a demo video on GPT 4.0. And then the performance of this model is mind-blowing, right? So just take a look at what is. Can you hear the audio? Well,
It's not clear, actually. The audio is not clear.
but Is it better now, Sai? Was it better now?
No audio.
Not for me. No audio actually. No.
Okay. Maybe I'll share the link with you, so I think you can watch it. So what it does is it's able to. So what this guy does. So if you don't know him, so he's Sal Khan, the founder of Khan Academy, right? So what it does is, so basically he gives an intent or gives a goal, right? So he tells the GPT-4o that his son wants to learn about triangles, right? So different angles, about hypotenuse, adjacent sides, and so on. What it does, it interacts with the kid. It is able to introduce the concepts, get feedback from the kid, so to evaluate how he is learning, and able to get give feedback in real time, right? So this is more, the GPT-4o behaves like a teacher, right? So here there are not a lot of prompts, right? So you only had a goal, and it is able to achieve the goal by interacting with the human. Okay, so that is where the power of GPT is getting into, right? And then few of the other, if you can go to this OpenAI channel, there are other videos where GPT can also become a participant in the meeting, right? So it could become a virtual participant in the meeting. It can even interact in the meeting, take meeting minutes, get notes. So it can also do this. So this is the power with which that the GPT system and the GenAI systems are growing today. Okay, so I have consolidated or made a list of some material, so you can go through it. I'll share the links and deck again. There's some of the beginners content that you can go through. So if you're interested in some next level of complexity content, so I can do that as well. So do drop me a note. I'm happy to share information with you. And then lastly, couple of slides. So there's a little bit of marketing here, right? So I do run a newsletter. If you are a tech lead or an architect who is working on the AI and other tech topics, so do consider subscribing to the weekly newsletter that I run at techleadcompass.in. We also have a generative AI community, which is a fast growing community. We have 100 plus people. So if you're keen to join, it is free to join. Then we have monthly online meetups. So not only me, there are other people, like-minded people who give their talks. So there are physical meetups. We plan physical meetups both in Singapore and Hong Kong. So we have an online community. We have free courses. There is also a book where you can get at a discounted price. So if you are keen to get involved, so follow this link or use a QR code, join us in the community so that you can get much more frequent sessions on generative AI. Sorry. And then, thank you. So we have 9 more minutes. So if you have some Q&A, I'm happy to answer. Or you would also want to share some thoughts from based on what you're using in an organization, how GenAI is shaping your industry or your company. Feel free to share. Yeah. Okay, looks like, yeah.
No questions, Ashim. Actually, in our organization, we are into it.
Mm-hmm.
What we are using actually, we are not exactly doing anything like on top of the model or something because we are using out of the shelf
Mm-hmm.
products because our company is not ready to invest it in. So
Mm-hmm.
as you said, the Snowflake is one of the uh, product which is into the AI.
Mm-hmm.
So we are using that one. On top of that, we are using ThoughtSpot. So that means all our stakeholders use their natural language to get the insights and take action on top of that one. Like our top executives are using that one. So
Mm-hmm.
that's the one. Another one we are using kind of a digital avatar that what we did right on top of the open model. We trained that model with our own data by using providing prompts and correct answers. We train in a way that is has been deployed in our automotive showrooms.
Mm-hmm.
So customers can use that. It's a kind of a digital avatar. It's like they can speak to that avatar and it will respond back to the data that we feed in based on this training.
Mm-hmm.
These are the couple of things we already used in our organization. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, very nice, very nice. Good to know. Good to know. Yeah, I think it's an evolving space, right? Because there are new ways that organization wants to use, but there is also this worry about the data privacy and the different aspects that come into picture, right? So it's an interesting world. Everybody wants to do it, okay? So, but the only thing is a starting point, right? So, what are the use cases that are more valuable to use? So, we do a lot of POCs and pilots with many clients who are trying to understand how it can help for them, right? But I'm pretty sure with more and more features that are coming out and more it becomes easier to use those features. I think Gen AI is definitely going to grow and expand in the organizations. Yeah, that's my view. Yeah, cool. So anyone else have any thoughts? I hope the session was useful. Cool. Okay. So if no other questions, I think thanks again. Thanks again for joining on a Saturday afternoon. So have a good rest of the weekend. I'll share the recording and then the link to the presentation. So if you're interested, you can go through it and then yeah, you can always reach back to me if you have any further suggestions or questions. Yeah. Thank you so much,
Thank you,
guys.
Ashwin. It was a wonderful session.
Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
Ashwin.
Thank
It's a great
you.
session,
Thanks,
sir.
Rajesh. Thank you. Thank you. Take care, guys. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.